Hey friends, on today's episode of Business as Unusual, we've got Gerald Leonard sharing his incredible journey of blending music, mindfulness, and business. From overcoming personal hurdles to writing influential books, Gerald's story is one you don't want to miss. Let's dive in.
Business as Unusual is a thought-provoking podcast that explores the innovative strategies, disruptive ideas, and unconventional practices driving successful leaders and companies in the ever-evolving world of modern business. Subscribe, comment, and share for weekly inspiration with our host, Aicila.
Hello, Gerald. I'm very delighted to have you here today. Welcome to the show. We already had, in 5 minutes, a nice wide range of topics. I have a feeling this is going to be quite delightful. And thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for joining. Thank you for allowing me to be here as well. I'm really excited to be a part of this and looking forward to our conversation.
You have a lot going on. Would you be willing to give folks just a quick synopsis of your different businesses, the program you were just talking about, so they have a sense of the possible directions this can go?
Right. My name is Gerald J. Leonard. I am a trained classical and jazz bassist, but I'm also the CEO of a consulting business called Turnberry Premier and a business called the Leonard Productivity Intelligence Institute. I'm a keynote speaker where I use music and jazz and playing my bass as a way to create an experience to teach the principles of productivity, neuroscience, meditation, qigong, and brain gyms, all based on what I learned as a kid playing music that I've used throughout my career, and about a incident that happened to me where I lost the ability to walk 6 weeks before my TEDx talk. And I won't tell you if I delivered it or not. We'll share that throughout our series here. And it led me to create a program where I teach a lot of the principles that I've learned called Growth Strategies Mastermind. And it's a program that I'm relaunching as of May the 21st, where I'm speaking at the Scrum Alliance conference in New Orleans, where I'm actually doing a major keynote presentation, playing jazz and speaking about these topics.
Wow. I mean, jazz in New Orleans, it feels like there's some crossover there.
It was funny when they called me and I said, how did you find me? They goes, don't worry about it. We've looked at your TEDx and podcasts and television interviews, and we've listened to your music. I said, well, who else are you looking at? They said, no one else, because you have this thing where you're playing music and you create an experience and you're creating jazz and you're talking about agile and project management and neuroscience. We want you. What is it going to take for us to have you? So it was great. It put me in a good position to negotiate. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. I attended a climate week in Amsterdam a couple of years ago, and there's a university professor there who said that playing jazz releases oxytocin. I don't know if that's true. Okay, cool. Now I can confirm that. Cool.
It is. Playing jazz releases oxytocin, but it does a lot more than just that. But it does create oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin just to really get the body engaged. But it also allows us to connect with people on a mental, emotional, and even a spiritual level. You'll be amazed when you see musicians work together. If you've gone to a jazz concert or even a rock concert in a band, and you watch a band and they really get into it, pretty soon things are happening and they're not even looking at each other. Mm-hmm. And they know exactly when and how. And yeah, they've rehearsed it to some extent, but there are many things that happen in the performance when you're connected like that instantaneously. And it's because we're, as human beings, are able to communicate on a higher level than words can express.
I read a book several years ago called The General Theory of Love. And it was the first time that I had really been introduced to a larger comprehension of how our limbic systems work together and co-regulate one another. Yes. And since then, I have been constantly fascinated by things like that. Because I'm like, oh, it's your limbic system. Like, it's connecting.
Exactly. We have an energy field that goes out about 3 meters from our bodies. Basically, you stick your arm out, and from your heart, this energy system goes out. And if you've ever seen a picture of the earth where they have like the energy of the earth vibrations around the earth, each human being has the same thing. When someone steps into your field, or if you're engaging with someone on a conscious or subconscious level, and even us having this conversation, and based on where you are in a different country or a different place, we're still emotionally and energetically connecting because of how we're created as human beings. It's really fascinating how our thoughts, our motivations, our energy radically interacts with other people on a subatomic level and a quantum physics level, to where we're really engaging with each other. So it's pretty interesting.
It's really true. And there's both hope and challenge in that I feel like I confront, right? What does success look like to you?
For me, success isn't just about money, right? A lot of people look at success and they think, if you're making seven figures, or if your business is doing this and doing that. And from a world standpoint, my business has become successful. But to me, I've also known people who've had successful businesses and have been very unhappy people, right? And so to me, success is being in a state where I am being abundant, and not just an abundance of I have a lot of stuff, but that I'm not walking around in the world with a scarcity mindset, that I'm being generous, not only in a philanthropic standpoint, but also in a forgiveness or in a compassion or being sympathetic or being generous to connect with people, and not moving up the food chain so much that now you can't go back and connect with people who are not where you are in life. To me, success is really about embracing life and being able to be in a place where you can enjoy the journey as you keep evolving and learning and growing, right? Because I mean, all of us want to go to the next level, and it's part of our nature that we get to one place and we go, okay, great, I accomplished this goal, but now I want more. Well, that's a natural human instinct, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just understanding what that means and how we can grow into that, but at the same time, understanding that we then have a responsibility to share and give back and connect more than anything else. So to me, that's success to me. It's much more than just money.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. I mean, money isn't real to a certain extent. It just represents things, right? And
exactly right.
Things
Having a lot
like
of money
time,
freedom, right?
Freedom or time, or the ability to manage your resources effectively. The real power in life is our connections in the world that we live in, right? And the ways that we can support and influence one another. I feel that you do productivity. We talked about this a little briefly beforehand, and agile, and you also do music. So I feel like that would have an impact on the industry that you're working in. Can you describe a little bit about the impact of maybe the place that you've presented, or the ways that the feedback that people have given you about the way that you show up and how that affects their engagement?
Sure. When I start off, I usually play a song that I wrote called Vertigo. And I share a story that happened to me in 2018. And I'll come back to that story, but then I'll get into what are the things that are principles that I learned even as a kid learning music. And there are three things that I learned that I share that have radically changed my life. And that really, when people grasp it, they go, wow, I can leverage that in my own life. I don't have to be a musician. And that is one, early on, I learned to really grow as a musician, I had to practice. And I had to do something called deliberate practice. I had to think about what I was going to practice and really focus on the repetition of practicing and practicing to get better and to grow. The next thing I needed was a band, right? Playing by yourself is fun, but then you want to have a band. You want to have people that you can play music with. And how did that relate to me as an adult? Well, as I switched careers, I had to learn that, okay, I'm getting into a new area. Well, what did I do in music? Well, I practice. Okay, so how do I practice computers? How do I practice project management? How do I practice whatever skill that is, writing? So I had to practice. I need a band. So what's my band? And when I got into project management, I realized that groups like the Project Management Institute or the Microsoft Project User Group or other groups that were a part of industries or associations that were related to my field, they were like my band. They were people who had a common goal, a common theme. I could talk shop, we could connect, and it was like playing in a band, working with people who were all going in the same direction, playing the same music. And then the third thing is you need to have a coach. And I look at coaches or mentors on two levels. One, you can either find a coach who's like a travel agent, or you find one that's like a tour guide. A travel agent coach is someone who says, okay, here's how you get there. Here's what you do. Well, you ask them, have you ever done it? Well, not really, but this is what I've studied and what I've learned. Here you go. It's kind of like going on vacation, and the travel agent gives you the brochure of how to climb Kilimanjaro, but he's never done it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's like, okay, great. You give me some information, but you really can't help me. If you have who's a expert, who is a tour guide, and they've climbed the mountain many times, they're going to say, okay, here's how you prepare. Here's what you need to bring. Don't bring this, bring that. When you get to this point, look over here. You're going to see something that you've never seen. So they know all the little intricacies that you would want to be a part of. So practice, having a band, having a mentor or coach. And how does that relate to me when I'm performing? I share those concepts. And I also talk about neuroscience. I talk about kinesiology, brain gyms. And here's why. In 2018, I was at a weekend workshop. And it was a great day. I got up, I jumped into the shower, and everything turned upside down. I could not go up from down. I was rushed by ambulance to the hospital near where I was staying. And they kept me for a day and a half. And they gave me some meds to make what I was going through stop. And after a day and a half, the guy asked me, one of the attendees asked me, says, hey, can you use this walker to scoot down the hall and support yourself, because you have to be mobile for us to allow you to leave. So I was able to use a walker to kind of scoot myself down the hall because I had lost the ability to walk. And this happened 6 weeks before my TEDx talk. And so I was driven home. I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking, okay, what just happened to me? I felt like someone hit me upside the head with a baseball bat, that I was on a big ship in the middle of the ocean. I couldn't look at TV. I couldn't look at my laptop. I was an independent consultant at the time, and I was the sole breadwinner of my home. I'm laying there with all of that going on. I start rehearsing my TEDx talk, and my talk is called What If Practice is a Performance? Fall in Love with Music, but I talk about the neuroscience of music. And one of the books that I read talked about when you're a musician and you're actively playing, the brain gets so activated that it will rewire itself if there's damage. So as soon as I could get up and grab onto the walls or grab my walker, I made it to my office. I played my bass a little bit. And then, every day I would play a little bit and start trying to walk without the walker. 3 weeks later, I walked into my doctor's office unassisted.
Wow.
And he looked at me and he was like, what happened? I can tell you've been massively impacted. And I share what happened and I share what I've been doing. He goes, oh, you've already started your therapy playing music. And what's your TEDx talk about? I told him what it was about. He goes, good luck. And, I look forward to hearing it. And I was still really impacted. But 3 weeks later, I stepped on stage and delivered that talk.
Wow.
If you watch the talk with knowing that story, you'll see that I was very deliberate in how I turned, because I couldn't move my head really fast anymore. If I did, I would lose control, right? And so I had to be very deliberate, but I was determined to deliver that. And it was about setting goals and working through. And I made a decision as I was going through that to get better, not bitter, and to grow through it and not to go through it. Because a lot of times when things happen to people, they can tend to get sidetracked and focus on what happened, why did this happen, blah, blah, blah. And next thing, they're getting bitter about life and situations or the lack of support they're getting. And that does you good. And to me, bitterness is drinking poison, thinking you're hurting someone else, but you're hurting yourself. And so it was really about getting better and growing through it. So what did I need to work on? And that led me to what I learned that I put in my program called the Growth Strategies Mastermind. And when I left the doctor's office, he basically told me, and he looked me in the eye and says, Mr. Leonard, we're going to be able to help you get some of your capabilities back, but you're going to have a permanent disability. And so I logged that in and I logged it away, but I also changed it and I said, I don't have a permanent disability. I have a permanent constraint, because words create worlds, right? I learned from a lady named Judith Glazer, who passed away. I did a certification with her in neuroscience. And one of the things she would always say is that the words we use create the world that you see. If you use words like disabled, you're telling your body that you're disabled. And guess what? Your body's going to respond, because every single thought you have has an electrical impulse that creates a neural peptide emotional connection, chemical connection, and your body responds to it and starts to obey it.
Yeah.
The word constraint, then I'm telling my body, you're not disabled, you're just constrained, you're just limited. So then what do you do with a constraint? I studied the theory of constraints, reading the Goal from Elliot Goldratt, and I studied with D. Jacobs for 2 weeks up in Connecticut at the Goldratt Institute. And a constraint is something where it's a limit on the capacity or throughput, but if you elevate the constraint and use that constraint, you can actually increase the throughput of an organization. Think about it this way: when you use a water hose, you turn the water on to water your garden. What do you put on it to make sure you water the garden? You put a nozzle.
Yeah.
Right. And what does that nozzle do? It constrains the water. It holds back the water, but it lets it go out through these little bitty holes, and it creates more spray. So the water becomes more efficient. So with that in mind, I started looking at my life going, okay, I have a constraint. So what things do I need to focus on that's going to make me just or even more effective than I was before? And so I worked on me. I worked on my mindset. I studied neuroscience. I studied kinesiology. I studied something called brain gyms, because I was going to physical therapy and all of the things that deals with the body and the brain, the rewiring and so on. And through that process, I learned about meditation. I learned about de-stressing my body through yoga. And as I began to do that and set goals, I started seeing my goals come to me so much faster than they did before.
Yeah.
Because now I had actually raised my level of vibration and my mindset and my energy level to a different level because of what I was doing. And I became a magnet for the goals that I was setting in my life. I was attracting in my life. I went through a divorce through that whole process, which, again, I made a decision to get better, not bitter, and to grow through it and not go through it. And after everything was settled, within less than a year, I had some friends and folks that I knew from 20 years ago reach to me and say, we want to buy 49% of your consulting practice, which changed the trajectory of my business and put me on a whole different level. But it was something that I attracted as I was rebuilding my life. And so these principles are things that I teach in this program to help people realize how they can be productive, but also intelligently productive, or productivity smarts is what I call it.
I talk about business as unusual. And I also, with my clients, one of the things that I feel is so important is to recognize that you're a person. I work with a lot of small businesses, solopreneurs, right? Sure. And they push themselves. You're talking about like that, and they don't. And I think there's a lot of cultural reasons that gets managed out there. However, if you don't treat yourself like your life matters, right? No one else is going to. And that which matters to me today is going to matter tomorrow. So part of my process has to be having the ability to sustain myself, not just my business, but myself as a human, right? I have to do things I love, spend time with my family. And most people really recognize that intellectually, but they have a hard time prioritizing it because they get a lot of messages that say that's not how we do. And I feel like the biggest part of my job often is to stand between the messages and the person that I'm working with, so they trust themselves and their instincts, and they recognize that they need to actually be in joy, be in collaboration, be in connection. And it's not just that they'll be more productive, they'll also be more impactful. They
Right.
will be able to expand their impact to in ways that they don't even understand by simply being that person in the world.
Exactly, exactly. And they will be in a place where you can experience gratitude, joy, and love, right? And
Yeah.
those words are so important because when we focus on, and this is another part of my practice, which I started doing on a regular basis in the morning, is I write out 5 things I'm grateful for, no matter what. And it can be something really simple because, one, gratitude is a different vibration level, a much higher vibration level. And by reprogramming my brain to focus on what I'm grateful for, then again, words create worlds. So if I'm grateful for the small things, then I go throughout my day and I look at different situations or circumstances and I said, man, I'm grateful for this. I'm grateful for that. If I get a bad email or an email that's, man, you got a lot of this to do, or a customer complaint, which, or whatever email is, right? If it's
Mm-hmm.
not one that I'm like looking forward to, I can stop and look at that email and go, I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to serve, or I'm grateful that I have the opportunity to address this issue and correct it, or I have this extra work I got to do. I'm grateful that I have that work. So then I change the emotions, because the meaning that we give things, or the meanings that of how we look at life, really are things, it's the way we give a meaning to certain things. And so sometimes things can be neither bad or good. It's just simply the meaning we attach to it, which then creates an emotion, which kind of can take you either up a spiral if it's positive,
Mm-hmm.
or down on a spiral if it's negative.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me about that is also you don't have to say anything to anyone. When my kids were in middle school, there were some moments I struggled. And I thought, I read something about appreciating. I said, all right, I'm going to get up every day and I'm going to just say out loud to myself 5 things I appreciate about each of my kids. And sometimes it was their room is not a disaster. It was very minimal stuff. And it changed
Right.
things. It changed the contention that we had been dealing with. It really shifted things. I didn't tell them that. If they listen to this, they'll know. Hi, kids, I love you. Middle school is hard. I apologize. It's just the way it is. But it was just really interesting to me how I didn't say anything to them. I didn't tell anyone I was doing it. It was me simply looking myself in the mirror and saying, I appreciate these 5 things about each of these humans that I get to interact with. Because I love them. It was just there were some things that were struggles at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Many times when we're going through something, the reality of what we're experiencing is our reality. It doesn't mean
Yes.
that's anyone else's reality, because they may be in the same room and seeing the same things, but they're experiencing it in a totally different way. And so, what I found is that when I'm dealing with family or dealing with friends or dealing with situations, if I experience an emotion that is not a positive one from that situation, then there's something in me. Doesn't mean there's something in them. It means there's something in me that is being reflected back to me that I don't like.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at them and saying, well, you need to fix this and you need to do this because I feel this way. It's like, wait a minute, they're not experiencing that situation at all. I'm the one that's experiencing it. And so working with some of my coaches, one of them is a gentleman named Dr. Paul Shealy. He's created a number of programs, books, and so on. And he introduced me through a story, through this concept from Hawaii called Oponopono. And then the idea behind it is that when you're experiencing something in life that is kind of rubs you the wrong way, if you will, right? Just kind of basic language, rubs you the wrong way, that you repeat these 4 words until you internally resolve it. And that is, I love you, forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you. And by saying that, what you're saying is, I'm not sure what's in me that is reacting negatively to whatever is being experienced. I'm not even sure where it exists. I'm not sure if it's in my past or in my future, or what part of my body it's stored in, because energy, memories, and things like that are like literally physically stored in our bodies. But by that little prayer, if you will, I love you, forgive me, I'm sorry, thank you, and thinking about that emotion, it begins to resolve itself. And you begin
Mm-hmm.
to see the world in a different way. And all of a sudden, the people that were getting under your skin or rubbing you the wrong way, it begins to change that situation. And it's really
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. But I think it really goes back to the world that we're experiencing is from our own personal perspective and
Mm-hmm.
reality. And Dr. Joe Dispenza will always say, our personality creates our reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that leads us to say, when someone says, I believe something, they're right, right? Or that I see this, or this is my reality, they are totally correct. But it means that people can be from the same family and have totally different realities based
Yeah.
on how they see, what they see, based on the words they use, based on their mindset, their disposition, based on the habits they've created and formed, and based on their thinking process. And so it's really important that as we want to create the title of your podcast of Business as Unusual, and we want to create unusual success, then that means we have to become an unusually creative and introspective person, not just that we're staring at our belly buttons all day long, but that we're very reflective, right? And that we decide to really work on ourselves, and that when we experience a situation that is negative, instead of looking at the other person or the people in the room or the team, first look at yourself and go, what is it about me that in my reality I'm experiencing this negative response? Right? Because when you do that and you decide to focus on working on you, yeah, there may be some things in reality that you have to talk to some people about. More likely than not, when you work on yourself that way, the situations tend to resolve themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, it's kind of like kids, right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't say anything to them. I dealt with me, and it shifted things for our daily interactions in a way that I enjoyed anyway. I was like, this is much nicer.
Exactly. So whether they changed it and liked it or not, mom was happy now.
Yeah, exactly. And the stories we tell matter. I noticed that they're funny stories I had about them when they were younger. And I realized one day, like, a lot of the stories fit into sort of a genre. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to create that my one child is artistic. That they weren't, but like, I'm not going to just tell the stories about them being artistic. I'm going to tell the other stories too, not just to other people, but to myself, because they were whole spectrum humans. And it's just so easy to get into a habit because they're entertaining or they're memorable, and realizing I actually have a lot of control over this, and I want to make sure I use it in a way that is responsible, right? To give more room for their space. Especially as a mom, I feel like you end up having a lot of influence. You have to be thoughtful about how you talk about stuff. Words create worlds, as you said.
Exactly.
So you sort of touched on this. And your journey, one of the things that I find really interesting is that, well, many people have experiences. Like, there's plenty of people that have studied jazz. There's plenty of people that have gone into business. What you chose to do, like, one, combining the two, a lot of people have an either or aspect to that kind of stuff.
Right.
To really say, I'm going to bring this all in. And that unique, do you know the moment or the experience that created that uniqueness for you, that said, oh, I'm going to move into business and I'm going to keep my music. I'm going to bring this in. I'm not doing one or the other.
Yes. For the longest, obviously, I've been doing both for a long time. And I did my bachelor's and master's. I did my master's at Cincinnati Conservatory. I actually had the pleasure of studying with a gentleman up in New York named David Walter. This is back in the late 80s. He was taught at Juilliard and Manhattan School of Music. I studied with him for a year and played professionally in New York, but also got into doing some ministry work. And then that's when I decided I want to go back into music, but I also knew that I didn't want to go on the road all the time, because now at that point I had a family, right? And I had kids. And I grew up where my dad and mom were always there in my life. And I can remember seeing my dad in my mind's eye, just getting up, going to work, coming home. And I owed that to my kids. I felt that personally. And so that's when I got into computers and IT. And I always tell people, I got into IT at the time. Well, if you could spell IT, you could get in, right?
That's fair. Nobody knew anything about it. They were like, go for
Exactly,
it.
exactly. I had this training in leadership now, and I had these music skills. For the first part of my life, I kept them separate. I would play concerts and do music and do different shows and so on. And then I'd go be a consultant. And then I started speaking, like when I joined the Microsoft Project User Group and things, and I was like leading, like the president of the club and president of this and president of that. I started speaking more. And so I just reached into my life. I told stories about music, and I told stories about ministry, and I told stories about business. And people would come up to me and they would say, "Can you tell me about that music thing again?" Now, I'm talking about complicated project management, projects I did for the National Archives or Geico or the Defense Logistics Agency or Del Monte or Partners Healthcare System in Boston. And they would come up to me and go, "Tell me about the ministry stuff that you did, or tell me about the music stuff you did." And people were interested in my life. They were interested in this unique person I was being and having these, and that they didn't want me to separate. This is my music life. This is my ministry life. This is my business life. It was like it all came together. And then one pivotal day or weekend, I met a gentleman named Willie Jolly. And Willie is one of the top 5 speakers in the world when it comes to motivational speaking, and voted by Toastmasters and also by the National Speakers Association. And his wife was an educator, and he was putting on a program about growing in your speaking business. And I thought, I've been speaking for a while for free as a part of my business, and I would actually get clients from it. I didn't really focus on charging for my speaking. And I thought that might be another revenue stream. So I went to his program, and Willie was also a jazz singer before he became a motivational speaker. And he was doing that, where he would speak and he would sing at the end of his speeches. And the crowd was erupting, staying on their feet and so on. And his wife and him and his wife looked at me and goes, "You're this musician that's a really good bass player, and you have this business, and you help companies with their company culture, and you're all about that bass. The culture is the base of an organization." And so that actually became my first book. I wrote a book called Culture is the Base. And I told my story about how music played a part in my life, but also how culture was much more of an emotional connection and a feel. Yeah, there were certain specific things that I did research around and discover that there are 7 principles: vision, values, buy-in, stories, execution, best practices, and the environment. Those are 7 principles that I talk about in the book that create a framework around how to build a culture. And it was all based on case studies and things I researched from MIT and the Wharton School and NIH, because I like peer-reviewed content, right? Scientifically based, peer-reviewed content. And then I took all my musical stories and applied that to it as well. And people loved that book. It really resonated with them because they could relate to the musical piece of it, because you didn't have to be a musician to relate to it. And that was really the beginning of the process. And then I wrote a book called Workplace Jazz, and it was about agile teams, business teams, because a small agile is just like a jazz quartet or a trio, right? Small group that's moving really quickly, got a big mission. And then my last book that I've written was called A Symphony of Choices, and it was a business novel. And it was, again, using a musical context, teaching very complex business principles within the music context. I'm finishing up the editing of a book called Productivity Smarts, where I talk about 24 prolific musicians and artists and their productivity superpower. Again, I'm using music as the foundation that everyone can relate to, but sharing secrets that I've researched and learned about Taylor Swift and Miles Davis and Ed Sheeran and John Coltrane and Stevie Wonder. And why were they able to produce so much music as musicians? And how can we learn from that as business people?
That sounds great. So, can you share some advice you've received that's influenced the way you approach your work?
Sure. I would say one, Les Brown is my speaker coach. And I get a chance to spend time with him and work with him and learn from him. And he would always say, make sure that when you're telling a story, that you're including the audience in the story. In other words, if you listen to Les Brown, when he tells a story, he also asked questions throughout. And it's the way I just took a program through at Harvard Business School, and it's almost like the Socratic case study method that the way they teach at the Harvard Business School. That's how Les Brown speaks. And it was like, wow, this is top notch. But it pulls the audience in to the conversation. And telling stories is also an amazing way for people to learn really complex concepts. Another one is something I learned from a gentleman named Mike Rayburn, who's played at Carnegie Hall 10 times. He's a professional speaker, but he was coached by Brian Tracy. And I've had Brian Tracy endorse my second book, Workplace Jazz. And he told Mike, he goes, if you really want to see your goals come to light, every morning, I want you to write them out by hand. And so he says, turn your goals into affirmations and then write them out by hand, and then take a few minutes to see yourself living that goal and then let it go. And then every morning do that. And I started doing that. And I started doing that in February of 2020. By November of 2020, that's when the guys came and bought 49% of my company and gave me a big deposit. Wow. And the business and my books and my career has taken off. And in fact, this morning I had a client call. I knew I was going to have our interview, but my morning routine is I'll get up by 5:30 and I do some yoga, I do some meditation, and I will spend time writing out my goals and planning my day as I'm writing out my goals and some other things that I do. I'll have a call here or there, but they're really short. But that's one thing that I made a part of my life now. And I've been doing it now almost 4 years. And everything that's happened in my life, I can trace back to my morning routine of writing out my goals, meditating, de-stressing my body, doing yoga. This is another one. When you're stressed, your body is constantly in fight or flight mode, right? And so you never get into creative mode or listening to your intuition. But if you do yoga or exercise and you distress your body and you're removing all that excess energy, and when you sit down to plan and think, now your body's in a state of creativity. It can perceive all of the wonderful things that you want to do with it. Those are just some of the pieces of advice I've been given.
Yeah. I have to get up and do the same thing, I stretch and relax. I listen to inspiring things, and I write out my day and my week and all of that, because I find that when I do that, it flows easier. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
A lot of times when you're trying to create new things or build, to a certain extent, I feel like that's a transformation, right? You're teaching people how to understand productivity in a context that is also about being in joy and in life.
Right.
That there can be moments where you face a little hurdle. You're like, oh gosh, this is discouraging. We all have those moments. Can you talk a little bit about what you do to keep yourself inspired?
Sure. I would say, one, it's about the journey, right? And it's not that I don't have challenges or struggles or what someone would call a failure of a situation. But one thing I strive not to do is turn a mistake or failure into a now. It's a verb, right? Because sometimes what can happen is when you're struggling with something, you're going, oh, it happened again, or this and that. And then pretty soon you begin to see yourself as that thing, and you're taking that failure and turning it into a now. So now it's not the failure, you are the failure. And that's a no-no. So one, keep it separate, and then look at those situations when it happens as stepping stones or learning opportunities. Thomas Edison took him 10,000 steps or failures or learning opportunities to create the light bulb. If he would have stopped at 9,000, we'd still all be lighting candles in the hallway at night trying to get through life, and wouldn't have television, radio, and all those other things because of electricity. Because he kept going until he figured out a way. And that's really it. I think when we're trying to do something really amazing, I think life tests us to go, how bad do you want it? And so it puts barriers and resistance in the way. And it's our job to understand that when we make a mistake or fail or whatever, that it's just a stepping stone. Also, surround yourself with experts. Surround yourself with a supportive team. I always use the phrase that coaching and mentoring is like being on the HOV lane. If you're from any big city, or right now, especially because of the way traffic flows, and even small cities are beginning to experience a lot of the congestion, if you will. But in big cities, they have something called an HOV lane or high occupancy lane, right? Mm-hmm. And during commuting times, what you would normally take you 10 minutes, 15, 20 minutes could take you 2 hours, just because of the amount of traffic on the road. But if you look to your left or to your right, and there's that HOV lane, you'll see people going the normal speed of 65, 70 miles an hour, but they always have somebody else in the car with them. Mm-hmm. Right? They have somebody else in the car with them. And they're like going through life, and they're not struggling. They're enjoying this process. That's the beauty of coaching and mentoring. Because if I have a really important goal, and I can tell you, and I think about every important project or goal I have in my life, I have a coach and a team. Because if I try to just, okay, I'm going to do this by myself, then I'm going to be like the people who are in the regular traffic lane trying to go home when instead of it taking me 20 minutes, it's going to take me 2 hours. And for a project and for a lifetime goal, it could take me, if I'm in the HOV lane with a coach and a team, that could take me 2 or 3 months to get the results that I'm looking for. Or if I'm trying to do it by myself, it could take me 5 or 6 years, or maybe never, right? If I run out of gas, flat. And so I would say having that support around you, and also your mindset, the mindset of, even if I make a mistake or I don't hit it on the first or second or third try, that those are learning opportunities, and that it's possible, right? It's possible. It may be hard, but it's possible. I can figure, if someone else has done it, I can do it too. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile. And after he did that, everyone else started breaking the 4-minute mile. But someone needed to see it's possible.
I really appreciate your stories and your analogies. They make things very clear. Thank you for sharing and for the way that you present that. For folks that are listening and they want to learn more, follow you, sign up for your class, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, my team and I have created a dedicated page on my website and it's at geraldjleonard.com/unusual.
Oh.
So geraldjleonard.com/unusual. And there's some giveaways, some free tools that you can find if you want to have a call with me. There's a link there or a page that you can click on and have a call. It also has information about my books and all of my social media connections, LinkedIn, Facebook, and those things. All of that's on that page, and it's dedicated and set up specifically for the podcast listeners that are listening to me right now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And I hope everybody gives a look-see. And thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thanks everybody for listening. I'll see you next week. I hope you enjoy the show. I love making it. If you did enjoy it, consider hopping over to the review portion of the platform you listen on and letting other people know about it. Or share the episode or the entire show with a friend or subscribe to the show. Definitely reach out, get on my newsletter, follow me on social media, and let me know what you like, what you don't like, and what you'd like to see in the future. Well, we love our guests. Appearance on the Business as Unusual podcast or any Bicurean consulting production is for information purposes only and is not to be considered an endorsement of their business practices, or character. Please properly vet anyone you find through this podcast and generally before you do any business with them. Thank you for listening.